Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
Okay, welcome back here to 775 Alive. We're sitting here in Nevada, which is right on the verge of getting started with our primary election season for 2026. Have you got your mail ballot yet?
I haven't. Actually, I've been looking for it. I've had a whole bunch of friends text me about CD2 and be like, what is with this list of candidates?
Yeah, and that's been common. We got ours up here in Elko County. They came out a little earlier than we thought. And I, for one, we had a controversy here in Nevada with people getting their mail ballots before they got their sample ballots. But we got the sample ballots before the mail ballots by about 2 days. But, because the Congressional District 2 up here, which is the northern third of Nevada, for those of you who don't live out here in the northern 775, that was Mark Amadei's district that he's held since 2011, and he announced his retirement rather suddenly, caught a lot of people off guard in February. And that has generated this. So there's 13 candidates on the Republican side. I think there was 13 on the Democrat, but at least 2 of them have since dropped out just here within the last week and threw their support behind another candidate. And I think there's 1 or 2 nonpartisan. So we've got like a 20-plus person race right now for CD2, and it's causing a lot of controversies.
It sure is.
Right.
Yeah. And just a quick note on Mark Amadei, there's 2 things that really were problematic. The one is obviously he retired right before candidate filing, which caused all these candidates to file, and it was kind of chaotic. I'm not sure why he did that, because Mark Amadei he's a very thoughtful, great man, and I'm just kind of surprised at the way he did that. But then the second thing is that we have a lot of great people retiring out of Congress, so I just wanted to make a note there that this chaos is emblematic of something deeper. There's a lot of good people leaving Congress right now, and I'm a little afraid about what that says about the federal level of things.
Well, and I still hold that it's much more of a generational thing. There might be some. Amadei's loss is going to hurt Nevada. He was a Cardinal. Are you familiar with that concept of the Cardinals in Congress?
Yeah, well, I like to imagine him wearing a big, priest
mitre. Yeah, the mitre bishop. No, what a Cardinal is a term for these guys that have enough seniority and can get stuff done that basically they control the funding mechanisms internally within Congress, right?
Yeah.
And Amadei had that status. You usually only have like maybe 3 or 4 max at a time in Congress that are able to do this. And Amadei was one, and that's going to take more than a decade for Nevada to replace, right? So whoever's going to win this tortured Congressional District 2 seat here in Nevada is actually going to, they're going to be starting as a freshman member of the House. So it's going to be a change for those of us up here that have gotten sort of used to seeing stuff get done fairly readily if we needed it. So,
luckily, the lead contender here is James Settlemyre, and he's been involved for so long. He's really good friends with Amadei, so I feel like yes, he'll enter Congress as a freshman if he gets elected. He is the strongest candidate, but I also think he'll have a little bit of a step up over the other candidates because he'll have that knowledge from Mark Amadei of where he left off, what things to follow up on, what can be moved forward on. So I think we'll be okay. Yeah.
Well, and of course, Settlemyre's primary challenger. I mean, he's got 12 others on the Republican side, but the one that's probably going to do best is Dave Flippo, who we've done a lot of stuff with when he was running for CD4. He jumps up into that CD2 race and has been one of the complicating factors because this race has become incredibly nasty. Again, federal law just requires representatives to live in the state they represent, not the district. So here we have Settlemyre, who's a rancher out of Douglas County, firmly within CD2, and we have David Flippo, who has moved up here recently to Reno, running for this race. And I think it sparks something that we really want to talk about today, which as we're going through and into this election season, we're seeing this weird dichotomy emerge, right? Where there's these big national issues. Immigration, affordability, which we've already done some shows on, that type of stuff. But here in the rurals, we're seeing a different set of issues that really aren't being discussed as much.
Yeah.
right? It's really a different perspective. Some of it you could expect. Mining is a big concern. There's a concern out here. Of course, if the Democrats take control of at least the House or maybe the House and the Senate, that mining is going to be put under a bunch of severe restrictions, which has a lot of people worried. Same thing if the Democratic Party captures the governorship, and we lose the ability, Republicans lose the ability to have that counterbalance of Governor Lombardo to veto bills coming out of a near supermajority assembly and Senate here in Nevada. But I think the real two big issues, and one of them is ironic because we've ended up doing all these shows on AI, right? But the issue of data centers. Data centers have emerged as a huge, huge problem. You've been following this fairly closely.
Yeah, data centers are a blessing and a curse at the same time. Just in terms of the overall marketplace, and let's starting at like the global level, we're looking at this competition between data centers needing to be developed in a grid system that can't quite keep up with it. And the real world outcome of that situation is you have poor and middle class demographic paying higher and higher energy rates. And that translates through to everything. So we're already dealing with the problem of inflation. We're already dealing with not enough water resources, and we certainly don't want to have enough grid supply for that kind of demand. But on the other hand, this is an excellent economic growth opportunity. And we're really trying to grapple with that. And me personally, and I'm sure you too, you've seen that it's had a really dramatic impact on rural communities. What I see is the prices of houses go up as other people move in and they're offering all sorts of money for houses. People are like, I can't pass up this price. They sell it and they move somewhere else. We're essentially blowing up rural communities while bringing these new economic opportunities in. And it's a big question for Nevada. Which direction do we want to go? Do we want to just grow economically and develop like everybody else and become like everybody else? Or do we want to hold on to what's special about Nevada? And trying to find that balance is really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's going to be, we're going to have a state level conversation, but let's break this down a little because I think there's a lot of interesting points that might be useful to break apart. Starting at the basic level, of course, we talked with Adrian Marsh, Democratic strategist with Altum Insights, a couple months ago, who was starting that study in rural Nebraska and was surprised at how commonly the issue of AI was raised. And part of that conversation, we ask her, what are they saying about data centers? And she's like, well, nobody's really talking about data centers. It's the effect of AI on social media and this other stuff. But boy, within about 2 weeks, by the time we dropped that interview, man, the data center thing blew up nationally.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be talking about it because it's rural areas that are going to be impacted by this. And there's a lot of issues, right? So we've got, places in Alabama, for instance, putting moratorium on data centers now, very heated county commission and city council debates in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan, and
Yeah.
Sparks is having up here outside of Reno is having a huge debate right now
Yeah.
about data centers.
Yeah, Sparks wants to put a moratorium on it because again, we're looking at the Tahoe Reno Industrial Complex is one of the largest in the world for data center development, and Sparks is looking at what they're saying is that the demand on the grid will increase by 40% over the next few years. That is an impossible number. It really is. That'll break both industry and people. So, I mean, they're kind of right putting on the brakes. And then you see other places like Goshen in Michigan where people weren't told by their county commission that these centers were coming in, and then they found out about it as they were building it. And the people actually got together and got themselves elected to the commission and stopped it.
Right.
And we're starting to see that these data centers, they actually shop for places just like anybody else. Like they'll shop all sorts of rural areas and try to find the best deal. I watched Amazon do this with cities. They pit cities against each other to see who offers them the best tax credit incentives and like the different, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Concessions.
Oh yeah, yeah, that works.
So what we're seeing is not only are data centers taking up these resources and blowing up communities, and again, I'm not against it. I'm just saying nobody talks about the downside.
Mm-hmm.
But what winds up happening is these rural communities sell themselves out. They give them the very best deal, and these companies come in and they take all the resources, and the town basically is left with very little. Usually, they bring in the educated labor that they need, and they pull electricity off the grid that people need. And people are it's happening in rural communities specifically, just
Right.
because easiest to try to get a good deal out of.
And of course, here in the 775, the other problem with this is water, right?
Yeah.
But let's break this down. So first of all, just for those of you who might not be familiar here with Northern Nevada, the Reno Sparks Industrial Complex is part of this massive complex that also includes Tesla's Gigafactory that was set up specifically to build the lithium batteries, right?
Yep.
So those batteries are what's being used in these data centers. But the problem with the data centers, one, they need plenty of land. I mean, they are buildings, right? This is not something you're going and putting in, on half an acre lot in the city. They're not super massive, right, compared to something like solar farms or something like that. But they do need land. But the problem that comes in with these is they're another one of these types of industries for a lot of people. Yeah, you get a big economic boom during the construction, but then when they're up and running, you actually need a very small employee base, right? So unlike, say, a mine or a factory that's using a heavy workforce that's going to help long-term development, you get this moderate boom. And then, in some of these cases, some of these data centers, there might only be 10, 15 guys that are employed running it, right? But you have the concessions, the tax benefits given by these communities to attract them in because it looks like economic development. The
Mm-hmm.
power thing is huge, right? And I think the power thing, there's a couple different dynamics. One, we're at the end of this 20-year sequence where there's been a heavy push for both renewable energy sources, which have not kept up with the promise they've demonstrated, right? A lot of problems with grid stuff, and an effort to delegitimate and actively close traditional hydrocarbon or nuclear-based energy sources.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a new industry that has a huge energy demand right when the country as a whole is not sure where its future energy supply is going to be coming from, right?
Yeah.
And,
There's
and
a huge amount of risk involved here. And I think that people are a little bit too mesmerized by the potential economic development end. There's a lot of ways that this industry can completely ruin our economy as well. And that's something that I like to give thought to. I don't want to see these cultures and communities getting busted up only for the industry to fail. And then we have a whole bunch of just random people that don't know how to have a way forward. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and that's where some of this comes from, because I think the connection that's there, part of the arguments going on is it's all doom and gloom. We haven't even got to the water yet. I want to hold off on the water for a minute because that ties into a whole range of other issues. But it seems from a certain perspective, particularly for small towns, these are the types of industries that have really been good traditionally for small towns. That is, where you get a minor boom here because of the workforce that has to come in and construct it. So you get enough of a tax base to redo the sidewalks and put in some pretty parks, maybe get a fast food joint or two. But then at the end of the day, you go back to being a small town, right? You go back with a much smaller footprint. You're not bringing 5,000 people in to work at this factory anymore to your town that's barely 5,000 to start with, right?
Yeah.
So data centers aren't going to do that. But I think part of the fear in this is that they're going to weaken the tax base because there's no change in the tax base. And again, rural communities are already suffering. Not so much that the tax base is bad. That is the case in some cases. But much more importantly, that the cost to do anything with their infrastructure is so expensive. There's a
Yeah.
real mismatch between what rural communities can afford and what requirements largely set by urban politicians onto these rural communities make impossible to do. So we're attacking that again. But more importantly, one of the things we've seen in California, like in so much else, is a good negative example. What happens if that grid gets strained? Do you tell the AI center, the data center, they have to shut down, or do you tell people, okay, you can't run your air conditioners anymore? And that's what people are upset about.
Yeah, no, it's a very serious problem. I'm doing a lot of thinking about it because it's Northern Nevada's chance to really get an economy of its own and not depend on Las Vegas and people in Las Vegas making decisions. But at the same time, this industry is fraught with ways it can go wrong. Some of the ways I'm thinking of is Elon Musk is thinking about building a massive data center in space. And one of the reasons why is you don't have to use as much electricity to cool it down, and you
Mhm.
can operate at nearly zero in efficiency, which is awesome. And it's also safe from like terrorist attacks and things
Mhm.
like that. So, and then you have nuclear fusion coming on board. Maybe that
Maybe.
will help out,
Well,
right?
if not necessarily nuclear fusion, although that's a possibility, but there's been a lot of talk out here in rural Nevada about modular nuclear fission reactors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that could change the whole thing, but there's a lot of ways that this could go wrong. Let's say on our way to nuclear fusion in 5 years, we decide to add all of this infrastructure to the grid system to accommodate these data centers, only to not need them in 5 years. Then we'll
Mhm.
never get a return on the investment. And you can start to see how this industry growing as fast as it is growing could cause some serious problems. And if we
Mhm.
stop that growth progression, what happens to all those housing prices? What happens to all those jobs? It becomes a train wreck, really, in
Yeah.
the economy. So it's like we got to really tread lightly and really think about what we're doing here, you know?
Now, there is a contradiction, and I think part of this is where we're talking about where these data centers are going. So there's a huge move in the western part of the state, right outside of Reno, down in the Douglas County, Story County. And Story County, although technically classified as the rurals, I mean, it's for all practical intents and purposes a bedroom community of Reno, right? It's more suburban than what a lot of people think of as rural northern Nevada, although Virginia City's there, right? But those type of things where you're going to see sort of the back end, the programmers, the engineers moving in conjunction with the data center, I think is causing the housing crunch, right? Over here in more rural areas, Elko, some of the places they're talking about south of here, those areas that the housing demand for the initial construction isn't going to change much, right? Because there's not going to be a huge staff staying on afterwards permanently. So in a
Right.
lot of these, we're seeing this up in your neck of the woods in Humboldt, man camps set up for the temporary housing of the construction crew, and then they're disassembled and taken somewhere else 4 or 5 years down the road. But that fear that this is really going to impact the grid supplies long term, and water. And you touched on the issue. The issue why those things are so expensive in terms of energy isn't just the processing through the computer systems; it's the cooling systems that have to be employed, and
Yes.
water. And there's a lot of fears that what you're going to see is you're going to see a shift that a lot of water that's necessary for small rural communities to bring more housing stock online might get transferred to these data centers,
Yeah.
right? So all of a sudden you have communities that see their water supplies tightened to fund something that might not be there in 2 years, or at most uh, brings in a very, very small part of tax revenue.
Yeah.
Right.
And so as those energy prices go up, I know that here in Las Vegas, we're already having a conversation about the housing prices going up too fast, and we have this lower income demographic that's being displaced. They're going to start to see the same thing up in northern Nevada as those prices rise and the water resources diminish. So we're causing a lot of problems on the way to the successful market. And I do wonder, with those obstacles and challenges coming down the line, if this could be a, a really bad thing for Nevada. It's really hard to say.
Right. And it's starting to play out elsewhere as well. We were talking because one of the things I think the data center problem is doing is it's accelerating attention to issues that at least some of us in the rurals have been complaining about for years, right? Electrical grid, huge, right? One of the things that came out in that Alabama case is that area of Alabama that put the moratorium.
Mhm.
They've got an electrical grid network that's something like 70 some years old, right? It's at the end of its lifespan, and we have a lot of that here. Most of the stuff that was built in the 50s and 60s is just frankly wearing out, and it can't handle the demand. It's inefficient, and who's
Yeah.
going to pay for that capital? Right? That's a capital infrastructure expense that nobody seems to be thinking about.
Well, that's
Um,
what for you. And in
okay.
their energy prices have gone up 280% over the last few years. So if you think of your electricity bill times three, that's
Mhm.
what.
Right, and then you're going to put an energy extensive, yeah. Then you're going to put an energy extensive thing on it.
Yeah.
But you also have the other side of this is also where the housing is being constrained is although we have a lot of land in Nevada, a lot of it's actually owned by the federal government.
Hmm.
right? So communities are already suffering with limited, and I'd say communities, but this is actually one of Las Vegas's problem. In some ways, it's more important for some place like Las Vegas, where they don't have the land to expand,
Right.
right? Up north, we might have land, but we don't necessarily have the water,
Yeah.
right? So it's a slightly different dynamic. But Mark Amity, just one of his acts, just introduced this with HR 2317 here.
Yeah.
That's designed to it's part of this effort that's been going on for years to force the federal government to secede some of these lands back to local communities, to states, and then states to counties, and working out that process.
Yeah.
Um,
And that bill actually requested 500,000 acres from BLM that the state of Nevada would purchase and make our state land, basically.
right, and then the state would parcel that out. Now, these things have always been controversial, but it's one of these things where I think there is a very sharp urban-rural divide.
Where are we getting
That's
water, Scott? We're getting 500,000 acres of new land that can only be serviced and put into operation if it has water. So how does that work?
okay. Well, you want to do this? Well, we'll do a short thing today because we really probably need to do, like 30 episodes on water.
Well, this is
Uh,
my question. I'm like, the state of Nevada is out of water, and there are houses being built everywhere I look. How does this happen?
right. Well, there's a couple different things. I think the first thing, and part of this is we just had a settlement on the Colorado River Compact, at least a temporary one through this August. But that's something else. Nevada, for your viewers who don't live here, or if you only live in part of it, there's actually sort of two different water dynamics going on in Nevada. So the southern part of the state around Las Vegas is part of the Colorado River Basin, which you've done a lot of work on in your various businesses, right? And the Colorado River since the 1920s has been subject in the United States to what's known as the compact, this relationship between the four upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and there's one other. And then the three lower basin states, which are, of course, Nevada, Arizona, and California. But the truth is, we're in a super drought. Those water levels are dropping. There's also agreements between the U.S. and Mexico.
Aren't they in the process of dropping Lake Mead by, was it like 100 feet over the next 90
Yeah,
days? Yeah.
yeah. And that just got announced last week, right? I was at a conference up here in Elko on rural tourism, and there were all these people up here from the Lake Mead recreational areas, and that news hit, and they're just, yeah,
Stavros. I felt bad for him too. I'm like, what is he supposed to do? But you can see how I'm getting a little bit bent out of shape with these decisions because on one hand, I see a headline that we're dropping Lake Mead by 100 feet. On the other hand, I'm like, growth, growth, growth. Let's build more. And I'm like, what's happening?
right. Well, and here in the north, just to
Water machine that I don't know about where you're producing new water rights. I don't know how this works.
well, it's funny you mention that because that's actually one of the problems that's gone on. So just to complete the thought, the northern part, Elko, Humboldt, our area, which is Congressional District 2, we're in the Great Basin, and the Great Basin is an Indo-Rheic basin. What that means is that the rivers don't flow to the sea. So the rivers and water supplies we have stay totally within the basin, and they either evaporate or they sink into the ground, right? So like Tahoe drains into Pyramid Lake. At Pyramid Lake, it either evaporates or does ground sequence or seepage, right? And that creates a totally different dynamic because now we're not just managing water flows. We've got basically a closed system that we've got to keep an eye on. And if the rainfall shifts that much, it could have serious impacts. But water rights, for those of you who don't know why we're interested in water rights, is like most Western states, Nevada has what's known as proprietary water rights, right? Back east, you have riparian rights. If you have a certain stretch of river or a lake on your land, you own sort of you have rights to that water for whatever footage you own based on the flow rate. But here in Nevada, water rights back in the 19th century, largely to service mining companies, became separated from the land. So it's possible to own land and not own the water rights that pass through the land, or vice versa.
Right.
And that has been not only, we've made this joke plenty of times, but the saying, at least up here in the north, is, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
Yeah.
Right. But one of the problems that's just come up in the last few years, the Nevada State Water Engineers Department has been doing just a horrible job managing these water rights over the decades, and they've over allocated. There's more water rights out there than actually technically exist. So now we're in this stage of trying to buy back some of these excess water rights, which a lot of people think they're using this to favor industries, which is where it connects to this data center, right? So some people claim it's the mining industry wants this water rights. So they're going to take it off of residential usage. You have other people claiming that the data centers are going to do it, so they're going to take it away from the mines. Every rancher up here thinks all the water rights are going to be taken from the ranchers because cows are evil or whatever, right? That's more your clientele, but so
cows.
well, I mean, this is an interesting dimension, right? You're seeing a lot of this.
Kind of the same thing we're talking about because we're getting things like data centers and mines that come in and purchase the water rights from farms and also the states trying to purchase them as well. And they're all offering them way more money than the value of the land. And it's really hard for a farmer to turn that down. And the important thing to understand in that whole process is once that farm is sold and those water rights are reallocated, there's not a farm in the world that can afford to purchase it back. So you need to know that once it's purchased and sold, it's done. It'll never be farmland again. And part
Right.
of the culture will go away and never come back.
And
Like,
that's one of the
you have to think about. I mean, it's not like, and the data centers are a little bit worse than at least mines. They're stuck where they're at and they have to support the community that they're in. And I hate that sounds so cynical, but they're stuck where they're at. A data center could go anywhere and they don't have to give anything back to the community. So it's a real concern that they're coming in and taking resources that we desperately need, and we may not get much back out of it.
right. And it goes the other way as well because there's also the concern if these rights are recaptured that could be used. So you have a community that wants to put up a new housing development, and the state water board's trying to decide, okay, there's so many water rights, so many acre feet of water rights that might be available. Do we let it go to housing? Do we let it go to mining? Do we let it go to a data center? So these communities who like most local communities, property taxes are everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Might find themselves stuck in this situation where those water rights that could actually generate more revenue for housing and reduce the price of their housing stock and help grow their communities might get shoved to the side for a data center that might be closing in 2 years.
Right.
Right. And then those water rights go somewhere else that they don't get back. So again, this back to my point. I think one of the things that's happened is that these data centers have just raised or brought to the forefront a whole range of issues that at least those of us who live out here in the rural Nevada in the 775 have sort of been playing with or having to deal with here for decades. Now they're emerging onto a political stage, right?
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
well, I was just gonna complete that thought. And of course, one of the things the data centers, and again, this is not new to data centers, is a claim. Well, the water rights aren't that big of a deal. We'll have a limited water rights, but then we'll recycle the water, the cooling water internally. And every industry that comes into Nevada promises that. So there was that salmon farm that was going to go on in the border between Pershing and Humboldt County, Winnemucca up in your neck of the woods. Has just started, they're bringing in that cardboard recycling plant that's supposed to recycle like 98% of their water. So they won't bring any stuff and people don't believe them. People up here are just convinced that this is just something they're telling politicians to go ahead and improve everything. And then when they're in, all of a sudden they're going to see water rights being gobbled up by these data centers.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting iteration in life for me personally because I did come from that side that just studied economic development and you study the playbook and the strategy and the numbers and you have this perfect business plan that you just want to stick somewhere. And this is the first time in my life where I've been on the other side. I'm in the community where someone like me is trying to stick something into this rural community. And I had just up until moving to Nevada, I had never considered, I didn't know what a rural community was. I didn't know what it stood for. I didn't know how precious and valuable it is to this country, particularly in the chaotic culture that we're in right now. And then for me personally, to watch this mine come in and watch the house pricing go up and watch people just leave. This whole community I'd come to know that had been together for 30, 40, 50 years just leaving. And like I said, this morning, my friend Garth was like, I'm looking at moving to Oregon because he's just right next door is a Starbucks now. He's like, I didn't sign up for this. I'm off. And it's like these are amazing people in an amazing and tight knit community that are being broken up. And I just, there's only so much economic development and increase in life, like quality of life that you can get before you realize you've got nothing left binding us together. We're just a whole bunch of autonomous units that are following the current of the economy. And I'm like, I really don't like that we're doing this. I really don't. I don't think it's good.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because I think that's one of the things we're dealing with. And again, we've got to show that a lot of people think, okay, you're sort of tightly focused just on rural Nevada, but we're starting to see this seep into the national consciousness. I've mentioned a couple times a lot of the things we're discussing today. What happens to this land? What happens to federal land? What happens to water rights? These were part of the strands that went through that Yellowstone series, that Kevin Costner series.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's also ways that this is coming up. Again, the data center issue and the backlash against data centers is largely right now a rural issue. But on the other side, we have a debate that's going on about this urban-rural divide. It doesn't seem to think that the rurals have unique issues they're dealing about. And I'm thinking about the current race that's going on here up in Michigan, their Senate primary race. And on the Democratic side, there's Mallory McMorrow, who's currently a Michigan state senator that's running for the U.S. Senate in Michigan on the Democratic primary. And she, over the years, has been quite vocal that rural America is basically useless, that they need to learn from urban areas, and that if the coast just sort of break apart, the country would be better for it, right? And just left rural America to odd. But this has raised such backlash, even in some place like Michigan, that she just recently, over the last couple of weeks, deleted something like 6,000 social media posts, right? Not just one or two that are questionable, but just thousands of these that she's talking about right at the time that these rural issues like data centers and water and everything else are coming to the forefront. It's a fascinating dynamic we're living through right now.
It really is. And to me, it's really rich because the people that want the rural people to just, become another unit in the whole, I'm like, do you realize you're asking us to join a system where everyone's anxious, depressed, and miserable? Like, you may think that your system works pretty good, but from our perspective, you look pretty unhappy and miserable.
Right.
So it's like, it's a hard sell for us. I'm just like, yeah, I don't think that the liberal culture's figured it out either because everyone seems pretty miserable.
Well, but not only that, but the truth is, and I would argue one of the strengths of the U.S. federal system from day one is that these various parts of the country have different interests and concerns and needs, right? And it's not necessarily antithetical for say somebody up here in CD2 says, yes, we are concerned. We are concerned about immigration. We are concerned about affordability, but we have very serious water and land availability issues that we want to see addressed. And then to have somebody from LA or Boston says, "Well, that's just not important. We're just going to ignore it." And by the way, you need to support our side on these issues. And if I had to say it, or if I had to analyze it, I think that is the issue that's playing out in this Congressional District 2 race right now. Right,
Yeah.
between the two leading contenders. This is an issue. Is this seat supposed to represent the national interest, or is it supposed to represent sort of these local interests? Now, of course, they're not mutually exclusive, but they're also not synonymous. And I think that's the issue that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and I mean, trying to be like everybody else is not good for your long-term competitiveness because if your economic profile is just like every other blue state profile, like you said, somebody from New Jersey is like, here's how you do it. Um, it's impossible to remain competitive if the market's saturated with the exact same thing all over the place. And that's one of my big things here in Nevada is like you're not quite under democratic policy as a state. It's a very free state. And there's a lot of states out there that are under the democratic policy. Let's see how it plays out. Because economically, what it looks like to me when they go for this massive economic development at all costs without any concern about the resources, that sounds a lot like locusts, They go from one place to the other, they consume all the resources, and then they leave before it's a problem. So I want to caution Nevada that this could be the story here if we're not
Right.
careful. Yeah.
And I think it's a big concern. So
Very
yeah,
big.
this is going to be, like I said, we're just getting ready to start voting here in the primary. So at least we'll have some idea here, a little clearer idea of what this Congressional District 2 race is going to work at. Of course, a whole bunch of stuff going on down in the south part of the state as well. So we're going to be covering back and coming to these issues. And I really do think we probably need to do just an entire water episode at some point when, you get some free time. But if you want to get a hold of us, please go ahead and shoot us a line at info@775alive.com. But until then, I'm Scott Gavorski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775.